A dying Apache boy collapsed at the edge of Benjamin Cole's farm, bleeding, fevered, hunted. The old cavalryman could have turned him away, should have. Instead, he gave him water. That single act of kindness would ignite a decades-long legacy of resistance, refuge, and memory that not even death could erase. They came with bulldozers, court orders, and lies dressed as law. But the fire kept burning, and when the world tried to forget, the land remembered. This is the story of one man, one fire, and the sanctuary that defied erasure. Benjamin Cole was a quiet man. At 53 years old, he had lived most of his life on the same patch of cracked red earth on the edge of northern Arizona. His farmhouse sat 3 miles from the nearest church, 5 from the nearest store, and 20 from anything resembling civilization. Most days he didn't mind. He rose before the sun, fed his chickens, milked the single cow that hadn't yet given up on him, and turned the soil in a field too stubborn to grow anything without a fight. His wife, May, had passed 5 winters ago, a cruel fever that came on fast and took her faster. They'd had no children, just the land, a crooked old dog named Whiskey, and the kind of steady routine that made the days pass like warm wind over canyon stone, slow, quiet, reliable. Benjamin hadn't always been a farmer. Years ago he'd ridden with the cavalry, back when his hands were steadier and his eyes sharper, but that life had left him before he had the chance to leave it. Now he walked with a limp that no longer bothered him and a scar along his ribs that he never talked about. The land remembered things, he believed. It remembered blood and water, prayers and lies. And though the war was years behind him, there were days when the wind still carried the sound of hoofbeats. Phantoms of men long gone, chasing shadows they didn't understand. It was on one such day, in the dry hush of early October, that Benjamin found the boy. It was nearly dusk, and he was bringing in the last of the firewood for the night. The light was amber, filtered through dust and dry branches, when he heard the soft rustle in the brush beside the barn. Not the shuffle of a snake, not the skitter of a rabbit, something heavier. He grabbed the rifle he kept beside the door and moved slowly. When he rounded the corner, he saw him. Barely more than a boy, 16, maybe 17, dark hair matted with sweat and blood. A wound in his side, soaked through the cloth of his shirt. He was slumped against the barn wall, breathing hard, eyes glassy with fever. Apache! Benjamin knew the look, the braids, the leather, the silence in his expression. He raised his rifle, out of reflex more than intent. The boy didn't flinch, just looked at him, tired, defiant. "Didn't come to steal," he said, voice a rasp. "Just needed to stop the bleeding." Benjamin didn't answer right away. He lowered the rifle slowly. "You alone?" The boy's jaw tensed. He didn't answer. Benjamin stepped forward, keeping his movements calm, deliberate. He crouched beside the boy, took a closer look at the wound. Gunshot, high on the ribcage, clean exit, but infected. "You'll die by morning if it festers," Benjamin said. "Maybe." Benjamin stood. "You can walk?" The boy tried, fell forward. Benjamin caught him before he hit the ground. He half-dragged, half-carried him into the farmhouse, laid him on the old sofa May used to sit on while knitting scarves no one wore. Whiskey growled once, then settled. Benjamin fetched clean water, bandages, what little whiskey he had left, and began to clean the wound. The boy didn't cry out, not once. By the time the fever broke, it was past midnight. Benjamin sat in the old rocking chair, watching him breathe. He didn't sleep. Too many ghosts in the room. When the boy finally stirred, he whispered, "Why'd you help me?" Benjamin stared into the coals in the hearth. "Because no one helped me once, and I remembered what that felt like." The boy didn't speak again until morning. His sleep was broken, tossing, whispering in a language Benjamin didn't know but didn't need to understand. Pain sounded the same in any tongue. When the light crept in through the slats in the window, he stirred again, this time with clearer eyes. "You shouldn't have helped me," he said quietly, gaze locked on the ceiling. "They'll come looking." Benjamin poured him a tin cup of water and brought it over. "Let them," he said. "You still haven't told me your name." The boy drank, wincing as he sat up a few inches. "Taza," he said at last, "son of Nantan Lupan." Benjamin stilled. He had heard that name before, Chief Gray Wolf, a man spoken about in low tones by cavalrymen long after they'd hung up their spurs. A leader, a ghost, a storm that rode on horseback. Benjamin said nothing, just reached for a clean cloth and began changing the boy's dressing. "You fought against us," Taza said after a while. Not a question. Benjamin nodded. "A long time ago." "Which side were you on?" Benjamin paused, then met the boy's gaze. "The wrong one." Taza studied him, then looked away. "My uncle is dead, shot 3 days ago while trying to cross the wash near Bright Rock." "Who did it?" "Men with badges," Taza said, "but no law." Benjamin nodded grimly. That wasn't new. Out here, badges didn't always mean justice. Sometimes they just meant a license to kill with no one watching. Taza's jaw clenched. "They shot me when I ran. I made it to the hills, thought I'd die there, but I kept going. And now?" "They'll be coming," Taza said. "At dawn. I was supposed to make it back by now. If I didn't, they'd ride." Benjamin stood slowly and walked to the window, looking out over the fields that had fed him and starved him and saved him in equal measure. The chickens were scratching lazily in the dust. The cow stood at the fence line, lowing at the empty road. "You saying 50 Apache warriors are going to ride into town if you don't show up?" he asked. Taza nodded once. "They won't ask questions. They'll burn it down." Benjamin turned, his eyes tired but not unkind. "Then we'd better make sure you're standing by morning." He spent the day tending to Taza, though the boy was strong-willed and stubborn, trying to sit up, trying to walk, trying to leave. "You get up too soon and you'll rip the stitches," Benjamin told him. "That'll kill you faster than a bullet." Taza grunted, but stayed still. Outside, the wind shifted. Something about the air made Benjamin uneasy. The silence of the land had changed. The birds had gone quiet. The dog barked at nothing twice that afternoon. Benjamin checked his rifle, then his revolver. He oiled them both, sat them beside the door, and made a pot of coffee that he knew he wouldn't finish. "You sure they're coming?" he asked Taza as the sun dipped low. Taza didn't answer, just closed his eyes and whispered something under his breath. Benjamin didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch with the rifle across his knees, staring into the dark, the coals from the stove glowing behind him. His thoughts drifted, not to war, not to regret, but to May, to the sound of her laughter, the way she used to hang laundry even when there were only 2 shirts to dry. She would have helped the boy too. He knew that. At around 4 a.m., Benjamin saw the first figure appear on the ridge to the north, a rider, then another and another. By the time the sun cracked the sky in bleeding red and orange, there were dozens, 50 by his count. They rode in complete silence. No shouts, no raised weapons, just the sound of hooves against dirt and the slow, disciplined descent from the hills. Benjamin stood, heart steady. He stepped off the porch and waited. They didn't stop at the house. They rode past it, surrounding the property like a storm circling its center. Then one broke off from the front and rode up to him. The horse was midnight black, and the rider wore a long coat of deerskin lined with beads and feathers that whispered as he moved. He dismounted. Benjamin didn't reach for his rifle. The man was tall, with silver in his hair and scars running like rivers across his weathered hands. He looked at Benjamin, not with suspicion, but with the measured caution of someone who had lived long enough to trust slowly. "I am Nantan Lupan," the man said, "chief of the Red Mesa people." Benjamin blinked. "Your son said your name was Gray Wolf." "I've been called that, and other names." His eyes narrowed. "Is he alive?" Benjamin nodded once. "Inside. Sleeping. I cleaned the wound. Infection's gone. He'll be on his feet by tomorrow." The chief looked over his shoulder at his riders. They remained still, no movement, no sound. Benjamin continued, "If you'd come last night, he wouldn't have made it. I've been watching. I knew someone would come." The chief stepped closer. "You gave him shelter." "I did." "You gave him medicine." "I did." "You knew what might come if you did." "I did." The chief looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Then you are owed protection." He raised his hand, and 50 warriors lifted their fists in salute. Benjamin didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. The chief spoke again. "There are few who would have done what you did. He is not just my son. He is our future." Benjamin's voice was quiet. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know," Grey Wolf said. "That's why it matters." Then he turned and walked into the house. Benjamin stepped aside as the chief entered the house. The air inside was heavy with the scent of boiled cloth and ash, and the fire still cracked low in the hearth. Taza stirred as his father approached, his eyes flickering open before fully focusing. "Father," he whispered, his voice dry but lucid. Grey Wolf knelt beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. Not rough, not commanding, but with the gravity of everything unspoken between a father and son parted too long by duty and distance. "I told them you would ride," Taza said weakly, a flicker of a smile on his face. "I never stopped," Grey Wolf answered. Benjamin stood in the doorway, watching. He had seen thousands of reunions in his time, soldiers returning to families, enemies embracing after peace, men burying their fathers. But none had the stillness, the unshakable quiet of this one. "You saved him," Grey Wolf said without turning around. Benjamin shook his head. "He made it here on his own. I just kept him breathing." Grey Wolf rose, towering and tired, and met Benjamin's eyes. "That's the most any man can do." Outside, the morning light was sharpening, slicing through the clouds in long golden beams. The warriors remained still. Their horses didn't so much as twitch. It was like the world had paused to acknowledge what had just happened in that house. Grey Wolf stepped outside again, lifting his hand. 2 riders broke from the formation and approached the house, carrying wrapped bundles of leather and cloth. They dismounted, placed the gifts carefully on the porch, and bowed their heads before returning to their lines. "These are for you," Grey Wolf said, "tokens of our respect and our memory." Benjamin eyed the bundles but didn't move to open them. "I didn't do it for gifts," he said again. Grey Wolf nodded. I know. That's why you deserve them." He turned to leave, but Benjamin stopped him. "Wait." The chief turned back. Benjamin swallowed. His voice came slowly. "The men who shot your son's uncle, did they wear badges?" Grey Wolf's face darkened slightly, but not with rage, with the kind of tired acceptance a man only wears after decades of watching justice slip through other people's hands. "They called themselves lawmen," he said, "but law is just paper in towns that never saw us as people." Benjamin nodded slowly. Grey Wolf looked at him. "Do you still believe in their justice?" "No," Benjamin said, "not in theirs, but I believe in something better." "Do you?" Benjamin looked out at the warriors still circling his land. "I do now." Grey Wolf paused. "Then come. Ride with us to town. Let them see you ride beside us." Benjamin blinked. "You want me with you?" "They know your face. They know your name. If they see you stand with us, it may stop bullets." Benjamin didn't move for a long time. Then slowly he stepped back inside and reached for his coat, his hat, his old revolver. He stepped outside again, limping slightly, but standing tall. "I'll ride," he said, "but not to protect them from you. To protect you from them." Grey Wolf nodded. And so it was. The horses moved as one, the sound of hooves thundering over the red dirt as they rode east toward the edge of town. Benjamin rode beside Grey Wolf, his figure unfamiliar in the saddle after so many years, but no less commanding. Taza stayed behind in the care of 2 riders and a healer who had joined from a neighboring village. The town was waking as they arrived. The first faces appeared behind curtains, behind cracked open doors, then more. By the time they reached the main street, half the town was watching. 50 warriors and a farmer they all knew. Benjamin's presence confused them. Some looked relieved. Others looked nervous, but none were brave enough to speak. The sheriff stepped out of his office. He was young, too young, the kind who wore a badge like it was armor but had never known a real fight. He stepped forward, hand resting on his holster. Gray Wolf reined his horse to a stop. Benjamin did the same. "This is tribal business," Gray Wolf said, his voice even. The sheriff eyed him, then looked at Benjamin. "You vouching for them?" he asked. Benjamin nodded. "They come for answers, not blood." The sheriff glanced at the warriors, then at his own deputies, 2 of them, both standing uncertain in the door of the jailhouse. He cleared his throat. "This ain't regular." "Neither is what happened near Bright Rock," Benjamin said, his voice suddenly sharp. "I saw the wound in that boy. I heard what happened. I rode with men like you once. I know what it looks like when a man thinks a badge makes him a god." The sheriff stiffened. "You accusing my men?" "I'm telling you this," Benjamin said, his voice like gravel. "If you don't hand them over, the ones who fired without cause, then the next time they come, I won't be riding with them, and there won't be any talking." The street went quiet. The sheriff stared at Benjamin for a long time. Then he gave a slight nod to one of his deputies, the younger of the 2. The boy looked scared. He disappeared into the office and came out with 2 men in handcuffs, former deputies, now stripped of their stars. Gray Wolf watched them without blinking. "These are the men who killed your brother," the sheriff said. "They're yours." Gray Wolf stepped forward. The crowd behind the windows held their breath. He raised a hand, then lowered it. "No," he said. "They will face judgment, but in our courts." The sheriff hesitated, but Benjamin spoke before he could argue. "You've got no claim to them," he said. "You lost that right the minute you covered for them. You're lucky it's only 2 you're giving up today." The sheriff relented. The warriors bound the 2 men to horses and rode out without another word. Benjamin stayed behind. He watched the townspeople shuffle out of hiding, watched the sheriff look down, ashamed, watched the wind scatter dust across the road where the warriors had passed. He turned his horse and rode back home. When he reached the farmhouse, Taza was standing outside. Stronger now, steady. He bowed slightly as Benjamin dismounted. "You rode for me," he said. "No," Benjamin answered. "I rode because someone had to." Benjamin didn't speak much after the ride into town. When he returned to the farmhouse, he slipped out of his coat, sat on the porch with a tin cup of coffee, and stared out across the horizon like he was watching something only he could see. The world had shifted that day, subtly but forever. He could feel it in his bones, in the stillness of the wind, in the way the birds returned to the trees without hesitation. Taza stayed for another week, long enough for the stitches to fully set and the bruises to fade, long enough to help rebuild the fence along the northern edge of the field and mend the old chicken coop that had slumped in the last monsoon. He didn't ask to leave. He just walked out to the porch one morning, saddlebags packed, and stood beside Benjamin as the sun rose red over the mesa. "I have to go," he said. Benjamin nodded, not looking at him. "I know. There's still more to do. There always is." Taza shifted his weight, adjusting the leather strap across his shoulder. "My father says you have Apache blood," he said softly. Benjamin's eyes didn't waver from the horizon. Maybe. Or maybe the land just got into me deep enough it doesn't matter what's in my veins. Taza gave a faint smile. "I'll be back." Benjamin finally turned. "You'd better." They clasped hands, not quick, not polite, but slow and deliberate, like a promise being passed between them. When Taza rode out, the dog followed him halfway to the creek, then returned. Benjamin watched until he disappeared over the ridge. Then he went back to the porch and sat down again, as if time had only paused briefly. But things didn't return to how they were. because something in the wind had changed. The town didn't forget what happened. Not this time. People stopped calling Benjamin that odd old soldier and started saying his name with something close to reverence. First in whispers, then in conversation, then in front of their children. One morning, a school teacher from town, Mrs. Delaney, who hadn't spoken to Benjamin in 15 years, knocked on his door. "I'm teaching the children about the territory's history," she said, fidgeting with the hem of her dress. "They asked about the Apache, about what happened with your visitor." Benjamin didn't speak. "They need to hear it from someone who was there," she said, "someone who understood." He nodded once. The next week he stood in front of 20 children in a one-room schoolhouse that still smelled of chalk and dust and old paper. He didn't speak like a teacher. He didn't dress like one, but he told them the truth, slowly, without pride, without anger, just the facts and the pain and the silence between it all. He didn't use the boy's name. He just said, "Once someone came to my door who had every reason not to trust me. I gave him water, and he gave me my humanity back." The room was quiet when he finished. He tipped his hat and walked out into the sun. A month later, a boy from the town showed up at his farm gate. 11, maybe 12. Freckles, too big for his clothes. "My pa said you helped the Apache boy," he said. Benjamin nodded. "I want to help too," the boy said. "I don't know how." Benjamin handed him a shovel. "Then start here," he said. And the boy did. Word spread, slowly at first, then with the unstoppable speed of something that matters. A group of women from the church came to whitewash the barn. A widow brought jars of jam and left them on his porch. A veteran from a nearby settlement came just to sit with him and drink coffee and say nothing. Then, one day in early summer, Gray Wolf returned. He came alone, no fanfare, no warriors, just him on a chestnut mare, dressed in simple linen and a single band of beadwork around his wrist. Benjamin stepped off the porch before he even saw the dust trail. "You knew I'd come," Gray Wolf said. "You're not a man who leaves things unsaid." Gray Wolf dismounted and handed Benjamin a small bundle. Inside was a ceremonial blanket stitched with the symbols of the Red Mesa people. The edge bore a pattern that meant Watcher of the Fire, and the riders began to return. Some came the next day, some the next week. By the time the sun had made its full circuit around the fire pit 10 times, the hill above the house was lined with horses, wagons, foot travelers, and dust-covered strangers who didn't speak unless necessary. Taza arrived near dusk. He didn't say a word, just walked to Benjamin, clasped his hand, and nodded once. "You got my message?" Benjamin asked. "I didn't need a message," Taza replied. "I felt it." They sat by the fire while others gathered quietly around them. Some of them had lived there once. Some had only stayed a night. But they all carried the same look in their eyes. This place had saved them. Now they would save it. A woman named Rosita, who had once arrived in the middle of the night with 2 broken ribs and a bruised soul, stood up and said, "We plant, we rebuild, and we make sure they see we belong." Another woman stepped forward, then a man, then another. They organized without shouting, without command, just shared memory and shared ground. Within days they had erected a second structure, half shed, half smokehouse, on the west end of the pasture, then a lookout tower on the ridge, then a makeshift gate where the road entered the valley made of cedar and old barbed wire. The company sent scouts. None returned past the fire line, not because they were threatened, because they understood. This was not a place to be bought. This was sacred ground, and they were trespassing. The nights grew hotter as June pressed forward, dry winds dragging across the mesa like breath from a long-sleeping beast. The land was awake now, alive, in a way Benjamin hadn't seen in years. You could feel it underfoot, like it was holding something just beneath the surface, some deep old rhythm beating in time with the fire that never quite went out. By the third week, over 60 people had gathered around the farm. Some came to help, some came to heal. All came because they remembered. Benjamin moved slower now. His hands trembled when he tried to pour coffee, and his knees cracked with each step, but his mind was sharp. When he spoke, people listened, not because he raised his voice, but because they knew he'd only speak when it mattered. The land surveyors came again, this time with machines, trucks, flags, clipboards. They stopped at the cedar and wire gate, where Leah stood waiting. She had grown stronger, taller. Her face held the quiet steel of someone who had watched too many people leave, but never stopped believing they might return. "This is private land," she said. A man in mirrored sunglasses stepped forward. "It's government now. Eminent domain. The judge signed the order 2 days ago. This place doesn't belong to any court." He smirked. "Everything belongs to someone." Leah reached down, pulled a flat stone from her pocket, and handed it to him, painted on it a sun, a hand, and a bowl of water. "This belongs to everyone who was ever forgotten," she said. The man stared at it, confused, maybe shaken. Then he turned to one of the others and muttered, "We'll come back with a sheriff." Leah watched them drive away, leaving tire marks on sacred ground. That night Benjamin sat in the old rocker near the fire. The flames danced low, crackling in the hush. "They'll bring more," Taza said, crouched beside him. "The law, the courts, maybe even the rangers." Benjamin nodded. "Let them." Taza studied his face. "You ready for war?" Benjamin looked out at the oak tree, at the barn lit from within by lantern light, at the dozens of people curled around the fire, some asleep, some whispering stories. "I'm ready for memory," he said, "and I'll make damn sure they can't bulldoze that." The next morning the sheriff arrived. Not the same young man from years ago. This one was older, broader, with a belly that suggested more politics than patrols. He rode in with a badge that shone too bright, and 5 deputies in tow. He dismounted slowly and walked to the gate, where Benjamin waited with Leah beside him. "You know why I'm here," the sheriff said. Benjamin nodded. "I do. I don't want trouble, but I have a legal order to clear this land." Leah stepped forward, voice clear as church bells. "This isn't just land." The sheriff sighed. "Miss, I don't know what you think this place is." "It's a graveyard," she said, "a sanctuary, a memory, a shelter. It's where the wounded found breath again, where silence was safe." Benjamin didn't speak. He just watched the lawman's face, waiting for the moment he'd stop pretending he didn't understand. The sheriff's mouth twitched. "I don't want violence." "Then don't bring it," Benjamin said. The sheriff hesitated. "You know they'll come back stronger, with paperwork, bulldozers. Then they better know how to dig through ghosts." He turned, walked back to his horse, and left. They didn't come the next day, or the day after that, but they would, they always did. So the people prepared. Not with guns, not with bricks, but with memory. They carved new stones, lined them along the gate. They sang old songs. Taza painted symbols on the barn. Watcher eyes, wind spirits, ancestral hands. Rosita built a smoke pit and taught the children how to feed it. And Benjamin began writing. Every morning at first light he sat at the table and wrote down everything he remembered. Every name, every face, every person who had slept on his porch, every item left at the fire, every note tucked into the slats of the barn. He called it the ledger. By midsummer, the ledger had over 200 entries. By late summer, it had 400. The last one he wrote with shaking hands. A woman came carrying ash in a wooden box. She wept at the oak tree, whispered a name, then smiled. She left behind a feather tied in gold thread. The land kept her grief. I remember. The day the bulldozers came, the sky was cloudless. 3 trucks, 6 men, suits and hard hats. 1 judge's order, signed and sealed. But when they arrived, the road was full. Over 100 people, shoulder to shoulder, standing silently in front of the gate. Some held hands, Some held stones. None spoke. At the front stood Leah. Beside her, Taza, Rosita, the preacher with no church, the woman in the army coat, the boy with drawings in his hands, and Benjamin, old, leaning on a cane, but unshaken. The lead contractor stepped down from his truck. "I don't want to arrest anyone," he said. "We're just here to work." Taza stepped forward. "You want to work? Start digging graves." The man froze. Benjamin raised his cane, pointed behind him. "To tear this down," he said, "you'll have to walk through memory. And memory doesn't forget." They didn't move, neither did the crowd. It was a standoff made of silence and story. After an hour, the contractors left. Not a single hand raised, no papers served. The fire behind them burned tall that night. Someone started singing. Others joined in. Benjamin didn't. He just sat, eyes closed, listening, because he knew it was working. That fall, the fire never went out. Even when the rains came, even when the wind howled so hard it snapped branches from the oak, the fire kept burning, tended by dozens of hands, many of them young, most of them quiet, all of them changed by what they had found on that piece of stubborn earth. Benjamin was tired now, more tired than he let on. He still rose with the sun, still walked the line of the field with his cane, still checked the fences and counted the hens and swept the porch. But everything he did now was slower, more deliberate, like he was trying to leave a memory in every motion. The ledger sat open on the table beside the fire. People read it aloud some nights, one voice at a time, no name ever spoken without reverence. A ritual had begun, unspoken but sacred. Before leaving the farm, every guest would write a line in the back of the book, not their name, just a memory. She held my hand when I couldn't speak. I cried under the oak, and nobody judged me. This land gave me back my breath. By the time the first frost clung to the grass, the book was nearly full. On the first snow, Benjamin handed the book to Leah. "This is yours now," he said. She blinked. "You're not—" "I'm not dying," he said with a smile. "Not yet. But I'm done carrying it alone." She nodded and hugged him tightly. It was the first time she had ever done that. The next day he stayed in bed. No illness, no pain, just rest. He sat by the window and watched the snow fall. People still came. They didn't knock anymore. They didn't have to. They came through the trees, over the ridge, down from the butte, some on horseback, some on foot. One woman arrived pulling a small red wagon filled with jars of honey and tins of loose tea. She set them on the porch, lit a candle, and sat on the steps for an hour without saying a word. When she left, she kissed the porch railing. 3 children came days later, barefoot in the frost. Leah brought them in, fed them soup, and warmed their hands by the fire. One of them drew a picture of Benjamin with colored chalk on the wall of the barn. He had wings. In January, Benjamin didn't rise. He was still breathing, still awake. But something in him had turned inward. Like his body knew he'd seen everything he needed to see. Leah sat beside him for hours each day, reading from the ledger. Taza came and sat silently at his feet. Rosita sang old lullabies into the dusk. And the others, those who had once been saved here, stood vigil. No one asked why. They all knew. On the last night of his life, the fire roared higher than ever before. The wind changed. The crows returned. And from the north ridge, one by one, 50 riders came. Not ghosts, not men, but something between. Apache warriors dressed in the colors of the old world, their faces painted with earth and ash, their horses silent beneath them. They circled the house like a ring of breath, like the heartbeat of something too old to name. Leah opened the door. They didn't enter. They didn't need to. Inside, Benjamin opened his eyes one last time. He looked at the fire. He looked at the girl he had once found shaking and silent on his porch, and he smiled. "You kept it burning," he said. Leah nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You lit it first." Then he closed his eyes and breathed out, not in pain, not in fear, just like a leaf returning to the earth. At dawn, the fire was still burning. The riders were gone. But in their place, they had left behind 50 stones, each carved with a single mark. No two were the same. Leah placed them in a circle around the tree, facing outward. They never moved, not in storm, not in wind. The land had accepted them. And from that day forward, no surveyor, no lawyer, no officer ever came again. Because they knew, because somewhere someone had whispered, "The old man who gave water to a dying boy now sleeps beneath the tree where memory lives." Leah ran the farm now. She never advertised, never put up signs. But the lost still came, the wounded, the quiet, the ones who had nowhere else to go. They were fed, listened to, healed. And before they left, they each placed something at the fire. A note, a name, a prayer. The fire never died. It didn't need to. Because someone was always watching it. And the memory of Benjamin Cole, the farmer who once gave water without asking, was forever etched into the land, not with statues or monuments, but with story. The seasons passed differently after Benjamin died. Time didn't slow, it didn't quicken. It simply stopped asking permission. The fire still burned behind the barn. The garden still bloomed in spring. The hens still laid their eggs, and the horses still walked the fences at dusk. But everything was quieter, not emptier, just more reverent, like the land itself was mourning in its own language. Leah buried Benjamin beneath the oak tree, as he'd asked. She dug the hole herself, took her time, didn't let anyone else help. Taza brought a cedar casket wrapped in red cloth. Rosita placed a bundle of sage in Benjamin's hands before they lowered him into the ground. They did not speak during the burial. They sang. A soft, humming song passed down through the Red Mesa people, low and even, like breath on the wind. The song was meant not to say goodbye, but to guide the soul from earth to sky. When the last note faded into the branches of the oak, Leah placed a stone at the foot of the grave. She had carved one word into it with a knife Benjamin had once given her. Keeper. They built a bench beside the grave, facing west. Each evening, someone sat there. No one claimed the seat, but it was never empty. It became a place of witness, a place of stillness. Stories were told there in whispers, sometimes in tears, sometimes in laughter that ended too quickly. The bench was never spoken about in town, but its presence was felt. The town, in its own way, changed too. The sheriff, now old, retired, and long since shamed, moved out of state. The land development plans were quietly dissolved. The company filed for a new project elsewhere, and no one spoke of the failed attempt to bulldoze the memory from a place that would not allow forgetting. Children who had once heard the story of the old Apache raid grew up and learned what really happened. They stopped calling it a raid. They called it a return. Leah didn't change the name of the farm, didn't hang a sign, but travelers called it Weaver's Rest, or sometimes just the place, as if naming it would ruin something sacred. In the second spring after Benjamin's death, a boy arrived, 12 years old, limping, face bruised. He didn't say a word when Leah found him standing in the garden, one hand resting on the fence post, the other clutching a ragged backpack. She didn't ask. She gave him water, fed him stew, led him to the cot in the barn, and left a folded blanket at the end. The next morning he was still there. He stayed for 6 days. On the 7th, he brought Leah a carved stick with 3 symbols on it, sun, wave, tree, and left it at the base of the fire pit. He didn't say goodbye. Leah added his memory to the new ledger she'd begun. The first line read, "He found his voice in silence." That summer, storms came early. Rain swept down from the cliffs, carving deep trenches in the road. The fire had to be moved to higher ground. They rebuilt the ring, stone by stone, hand by hand. No blueprints, just instinct and memory. Taza returned in June. He brought his own daughter this time, a girl with eyes like her father's and scars hidden beneath long sleeves. She took to the land quickly, barefoot and curious, asking more questions in a day than Leah had spoken her entire first month on the farm. "What happened here?" she asked one afternoon, her hands in the dirt, planting seeds. Leah paused, then said, "Once someone gave water to a dying boy. That kindness grew so big the land had to hold it." The girl nodded. "Did the boy live?" Leah smiled. "Yes, and so did everyone else." By late summer, they had planted a grove of young trees beyond the pasture. Each tree marked a season, one for winter, one for spring, one for summer, one for fall. Beneath each tree, someone had buried something they needed to let go of: a letter, a name, a dream, a burden. The land kept it all. It didn't judge, it just held. And when the wind moved through the branches, it didn't sound like morning anymore. It sounded like memory. Fall settled like a whisper across the mesa, brushing the tops of the new grove with golden light and pressing cool winds down from the north. The land slowed. The nights stretched longer. Crickets returned to the grass, and owls took perch on the barn's highest beam, watching the fire flicker each evening like it was a story they too were waiting to hear the ending of. Leah moved through the days with practiced rhythm now, rising before the sun, feeding the animals, tending the garden, sitting with newcomers in silence when silence was what they needed. She still added to the ledger. It had grown thick, bound in soft leather, its pages edged with fingerprint smudges and the scent of cedar smoke. On the first frost of the season, a woman arrived carrying only a violin case and a folded coat. She had short hair, tired eyes, and the kind of quiet that came from long grief. She didn't speak when Leah opened the gate, didn't ask to stay. She just sat down beside the fire, opened the violin case, and played a song so slow and aching it made the wind stop moving. Leah sat across from her, the fire between them, eyes shining. She didn't clap when it ended, just said, "You're safe now." The woman nodded and slept in the barn that night. In the morning, she was gone, but she left the violin. Inside the case, on a scrap of paper, she'd written, "This place gave me one night of peace. That was more than I thought I'd get." By winter, the trees in the grove had grown tall enough to bend in the wind. Birds began nesting in them. One tree, planted by Rosita, flowered out of season, dropping tiny red petals in the snow. No one understood how. No one questioned it. The soil knew more than they did. Then one morning, just after New Year's, Taza returned, but not alone. He rode with 4 others, 2 men, a woman, and a young boy no older than 7. They dismounted quietly, respectfully, as if crossing into something sacred. Leah met them at the gate, arms crossed, hair pulled into a braid that hung down her back like a line drawn by memory itself. "They need rest," Taza said simply. "They're home," she replied. That night, Taza sat beside the fire and spoke for the first time in months. Others gathered close. Not just the new arrivals, dozens who had stayed, left, returned, old faces, familiar names. He stood slowly, looking out at the grove, the barn, the porch, the fire. "I once was dying," he said. "I was shot, afraid and alone. I stumbled to this land, thinking it was my last breath." He paused. "But a man gave me water. He gave me silence. He asked nothing. He expected nothing. And because of that one small kindness, my life continued." He turned toward the oak tree, and so did his. There was no applause, only quiet, only the sound of wood settling in the fire pit. Later that night, a child asked Leah why the fire never went out. She thought for a long time, then said, "Because we don't let it." "But what happens if we forget?" She looked at him. "Then the land will remember for us." The boy seemed satisfied with that. The next morning, he placed a drawing in the ledger, crayon lines forming a circle of people around a flame. He labeled it simply, "Before I was sad, then I was here." That spring, a letter arrived from the county, typed, formal. dry. They were attempting once again to reclaim the land, this time not for development, for preservation. They called it a cultural site. Leah read it 3 times, then handed it to Taza. He read it once, then burned it in the fire. They want to protect what they don't understand, he said. They want to own what they didn't build, Leah replied. They didn't speak of it again. The fire burned it clean. That year, Leah began building cabins on the edge of the property. Small ones, one-room spaces with beds and windows and silence. She didn't charge, didn't advertise. She just built them. People came, they stayed, they wrote in the ledger, and the land kept record of them all. In the 5th year after Benjamin's death, Leah stood beneath the oak tree and planted another, beside the first. She called it the brother tree. Rosita sang over it. Taza tied a strip of cloth to its branch, and the children painted stones to circle the roots. On the back of each stone, Leah wrote a single word, kept. Because that's what this place was, a place that kept the broken pieces people couldn't carry anymore, and gave them back as something whole. Summer arrived slow, like it had to earn its place. Rain came heavy at first, soaking the roots, filling the barrels. The garden flourished, the grove thickened. The porch creaked louder beneath the weight of people coming and going, stories arriving and leaving like wind through wheat. Leah didn't mark years with calendars anymore. She marked them with arrivals. There was the year of the violinist, the year of the 3 brothers who never spoke aloud but rebuilt the entire eastern fence by hand, the year of the woman who gave birth in the barn with Rosita holding her hand. Each of them left something behind. Each of them changed the shape of the fire. By now, there were 5 fire circles, each one placed by the hands of those who needed it most. The first, the original, still burned nightly. That one was Benjamin's. It always would be. On the anniversary of his passing, they held a silent walk. No speeches, no candles, just bare feet in the soil and hands placed on the oak tree's trunk one by one. Taza stood before it last. "I was the dying boy," he said. The children in the crowd listened, wide-eyed. Some had never heard him say it aloud. "He gave me water. That's what started it. Water." He turned, eyes wet. "You think it takes power to change the world? No, it takes a bowl of water and the choice not to ask a question." He pressed his palm to the bark. "Keep her," he whispered. That night the wind came down hard from the hills, but the fire never flickered. Leah slept beside it, wrapped in her father's old blanket, the ledger beside her. She had filled 4 volumes by now, each with thousands of names, some real, some whispered, some drawn in pictures by hands too young to spell. The following winter brought something unexpected. Snow, more than usual, so much that the roads disappeared, and the cabins became islands in a sea of white. But no one left. They stayed, huddled by fires, wrapped in borrowed coats and blankets, stitched with memory. They told stories, and then one night Taza walked into the circle and collapsed. He didn't speak, didn't breathe. His heart had stopped. Leah was there. She tried. They all tried. But Taza was gone. The boy who had once crawled across Benjamin's field, shot and bleeding, had grown into the man who watched over the land as if it were breath itself. They buried him beneath the brother tree, and this time Leah carved the stone herself. It read, "Taza, you were seen, you were saved, you became the fire." His horse remained. It wandered the pasture for weeks, letting no one ride it, not even the children. But every night it stood beside the fire until dawn. That spring, Leah built a tower just outside the west pasture, 4 posts, a roof, no walls. It wasn't for defense, it was for watching, a place to sit and see the road, to wait for who might come, to honor who had left. They called it the Keeper's Lookout. She didn't spend much time in it, only when the wind changed, only when the stars felt like they were carrying names she hadn't heard yet. That summer, a man in a black suit arrived. He said nothing. He left a book, inside a letter. I came here 20 years ago with a badge and a gun. I came ready to end a boy. I left changed. I thought I could forget. I couldn't. This is my repentance. Inside the book were a dozen pages. All blank except one. It said, I am sorry. I am still trying. Leah placed it in the ledger's chest beside the fire. Years passed. The land didn't forget. Neither did she. And then one night, she saw him, a boy, alone, walking the road with a limp, a tear in his sleeve, and eyes full of unspoken ache. She stood on the porch. She didn't ask his name. She brought him water, just like Benjamin had done, and the fire behind her whispered, yes. Leah didn't mark the years by birthdays or holidays. She marked them by the names in the ledger. Camille said 3 words all week, but smiled when she saw the sun rise. Milo painted the gate green without asking, left a pine cone on the step when he left. JJ slept in the loft for 40 days, said the fire was the only thing that listened. And then Ben, age 12, limped when he arrived, danced when he left. She kept all of them, not just on paper, but in the land. Each spring they planted one tree per 10 names. The orchard had once been a field. Now it was a memory forest. The people called it the Kept. Every tree had a small tag nailed into its trunk just above eye level. Not names, not numbers. Symbols, a tear, a bird, a broken chain, a bowl of water, a hand with no weapon in it. Every time a new tree was planted, Leah knelt in the dirt, placed her hands in the soil, whispered the names of those who had left, even the ones she never learned, especially those. In the 10th year, the sky changed. Fires came again, not theirs. Wildfires sweeping down from the northern ridges, blackening the sky for days. Ash fell like snow. The horizon disappeared. The people gathered. Leah stood on the tower, watched the glow crawl closer each night. They prepared the land, dug trenches, cleared brush, wetted the fields. But it wasn't enough. One morning, the east wind came strong, carrying heat and silence and the scent of pine dying too fast. The fire would be there by dusk. Leah stood before the oak, laid her hand on its bark. Not again, she whispered. Not again would something be taken from her. Not this place, not this memory, not the story that had begun with a boy and a drink of water. She walked the lines. Taza's daughter rode the fence. Rosita rallied the children into the cellar with jars of peaches and cornmeal. Then the wind shifted without warning. It blew the other way, south, sharp, furious. The fire curved like it had been turned by something unseen. Some of the oldest among them whispered, "He turned it," meaning Benjamin, meaning Grey Wolf, meaning the land itself. They didn't question it. They just watched as the fire curved wide around the ridge and disappeared. Not a single cabin was lost. Not a single tree from the Kept burned. That night they gathered at the fire. They sang songs not in English, not in Apache. Songs that came from memory itself. Leah sat in her chair beside the flames, the ledger in her lap. The violin, now worn soft by time, lay in its open case beside her. A child approached, maybe 6, maybe 7. He looked at her. "Was the story real?" he asked. "Which one?" "The one about the farmer, and the boy, and the warriors," she smiled. "It was real enough to bring you here, wasn't it?" He nodded. "Can I stay?" "You already have." And he curled beside the fire, no blanket needed, no permission asked. Safe, the way Benjamin would have wanted. In the morning, Leah rose early. The birds hadn't yet begun to sing. She walked to the oak, pressed her forehead to the bark, and whispered, "It still matters." Then she lit the fire for another day, the first flame of the next 1,000 stories.